Hello, my name is Isabella Sanchez, and today I'm going to be interviewing Celia Lisset Alvarez, author of books like The Stones, Shapeshifting, and the upcoming book Multiverse coming out on May 7th. Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, today we're going to be talking about your book Shapeshifting, and which came out in 2006. It's been a while. So I was wondering if you could give me a three sentence or something along the lines of, for anyone who hasn't read it, like what is it about?
It's about anger. It's about feeling this need to transform myself constantly into else's vision of what I should be. To give you an example, I wrote a lot of those poems when I was in graduate school. And in graduate school, my husband and I were the only ones who were Hispanic. And so you feel all this pressure to write about, the Hispanic point of view, or, put a mango in a poem or something like that. And that really, you know, angers me and limits me. And so a lot of these poems are about that.
Thank you. It's interesting because I one of my questions was really about that. That's one of the main things that drew me into your work was the Hispanic representation, and I feel like mostly it's not something really present in the writing community. So I was kind of wondering, what do you think about that? And I know you have one of your main poems that talks about that is Letters from Cuba. So I was kind of wondering also, like, I'm gonna guess that it is really important for you to have that present in your book.
I would like to get to a point where Hispanics can write books about being Hispanic that are quote unquote normal. I don't know if I can explain what that means, but it seems to me like a lot of times when a Hispanic book hits the market and succeeds, it does so in a special category. This is not the American experience, but this is the Latinx experience, or the Cuban experience, or the Puerto Rican experience. Or so I would like to get to a point where we're writing our lives as they are without necessarily having to write them to a white audience. I think that's the best way to explain it for me. That I feel that sometimes a lot of Latinx writers have a white audience in mind. So you do things like you italicize phrases in Spanish, for example. I mean, why would you do that if you didn't expect your reader to be an English reader? Which is not to say that, you don't expect your reader to be an English reader. You are writing in English. But like Junot Diaz said, I don't have the exact quote, but there was a really funny thing that he said about Lord of the Rings, that about half of it was written in Elven or Elfish or something. I don't know Lord of the Rings. But no, but problem with that. But then you toss just a couple of Spanish phrases into a book, and all of a sudden it's incomprehensible. And I thought that that really opened my eyes to what I was trying to accomplish. Yes, I am Hispanic, and yes, I want to see Hispanics represented in American literature, but I want to see them represented as normal, not as an alternative experience, but rather as central to what it is to be an American. That makes sense?
Makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, it definitely um it makes sense. Like I write about a lot of that because I definitely want people to get to know more of us in just the basics or what they know about us through like just like maybe stereotypes, which is not ideal. So I definitely get that. So I guess something that I was wondering is, and that I was like curious about was, why was the book called Shape Shifting? And I mean, I guess since you talked about it was in graduate school, it's certain like that point is something a lot is going on. So
I didn't have another title for it. The poems are very different in it. Chapbooks are supposed to be very cohesive. And the only overarching idea that I could find to all of these poems was that they shifted. They shifted in terms of perspective, in terms of um, who the persona speaking was in the poem. I have a lot of poems in there. For example, like The Poet's Body, which could be written by anyone. And then I have poems like you mentioned, Letters from Cuba, which is something that only someone who knows about the Cuban experience would have been able to write about. So I felt like I was kind of shape-shifting, trying on different styles, different voices, and different points of views in order to maybe try to find my own voice. I wrote this some time ago, and I'm not a spring chicken or anything, but this was just my first chapbook. So I felt like I didn't really have a distinct voice at that time.
thank you. So I mean, one of my questions was if like picking the title was your first choice, but I'm gonna guess then the poems have more influence on the title than
That-
so do you think that's more effective just like writing poems first, like starting with that and then going based off on that like for the rest of
Yes and no. I think it depends on the material that you're working with. Sometimes I'm writing poems individually and I don't know where they're going to wind up. At this very moment, I'm going through a process of thinking, okay, so what's my next book going to be about? And I'm looking through hundreds of poems that have not been part of a collection and trying to see which go together. So that's one possible scenario. But then, for example, for my latest book that's being released now, it went the opposite way. It started with the concept of the multiverse, and I knew I wanted to write about a particular experience, a particular time period, from 2015 to 2019. And so I wrote the poems after the concept of the book. So I think you could do it either way. I think certainly writing multiverses was much easier. I think it's easier if you have a concept and writing to that than if you are just randomly writing and then you're trying to put it together, because sometimes it just does not go together, or you have too few poems that go together, or, so.
yeah, definitely. I'm more of on the side that I just kind of like get everything out on the paper and then just kind of figure it out if it makes sense or not. I think it's just it feels more natural to me in my writing. Makes more sense. Thank you. um, I feel like one of the poems that connects a lot to the whole idea and the title of the book is Shapeshifter, and which feels really personal. And I was just kind of wondering if you actually like personalize it to some of your own experiences and thoughts, and if that's a more effective way to get to the readers.
Not necessarily. I mean, I put a lot of myself into that poem. And if you notice the style of the poem, it's very different from the other poems in the collection. It's more, gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not very narrative. It's more of an image driven poem. And I put a lot of memory of my own memories in it and growing up and things that have happened to me. But I also allowed the poem to write itself in a way. If I saw it going in a certain direction and a certain set of images was working well and being compelling, then I kind of ran with that too. So it's not completely autobiographical, but it did start with autobiography and just emotion only, no narrative.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I definitely am more of a image driven writer, and that's one of the things that I really loved about your poems. And I feel like that's how me as a writer get more of what is going on and the feelings and the message. And I kind of noticed that in multiple of your poems, you kind of talked about this body image, specific parts of the body, like the breast and the bones and the wrists in a way. And I was just kind of wondering if you could talk about the process of approaching those raw topics that maybe just not many people talk about in like in detail.
A little weird. I think that what I was trying to do was to build my writing persona quite literally, from the bone up. So if you take a look at, for example, the poet's body, it's all about trying to fit into a certain image of what a poet should be. There's the cliched image of the poet with the black turtleneck and the beret and or the some kind of hippie bohemian type, or there's always some stereotype that's haunting you when you're writing. And so I think a lot about the body and just how simple the body can be, and how if you take it apart, it's really not anything special that makes you a poet. What makes you a poet is how you put it back together. So I have a lot of references to parts of the body that you often see in poems, like breasts, for example. You even in much earlier poetry, you have these poems, praising the breasts of the lover or whatever. But in my poem, they're just breasts. They are what they are, and they're not even Latina breasts. They're just there. They're just
Yeah,
going for it.
thank you. Yeah, I was just, interested. It's definitely something that I feel like sometimes people over sexualize. And I think it's kind of still in a taboo, even if we're in 2021. And I know this book has been out for a couple of years. So I was just like overall like interested of how you were kind of like talking about that and also the Hispanic um, topics when it's just something really maybe over there. I was 6 years old, so but I have an overall idea. Obviously, things have changed a lot. So
For Latina women, I don't know. I think we're still haunted by the over sexualized sort of representation of the Selma Hayek type, or the what's the other woman from Modern Family? I
oh,
forget her. The what? Who?
Sofia Vergara.
Yeah, Vergara, right? That's who I was trying to think of. Who just happen to be super sexy and Hispanic, but that doesn't mean that all Hispanic women are super sexy. There's very unsexy ones, and that does make them not Hispanic. Um, so we're either depicted as over sexualized, or as maids, or just low level workers of some kind. And that's still very, very much a truth, even in 2021. You don't see the kinds of roles that you see for white women for Latin women. Latin women are always Latin in some way. That is part of their character, in a way that being white isn't part of a white character's identity.
Yeah, it's just how we have to live, but hopefully things change.
Hopefully.
Thank you. So going a little bit more deeper into some of the techniques and choices you make in some of your poems. In Strawberry Picker and Mechanical Aptitude, there's this like questioning tone. And I was wondering if that was a subtle way to show that shape shifting kind of thing.
In the strawberry picker, yes, very much so. The strawberry picker was inspired by, well, the strawberry pickers here in Florida, who are usually migrant workers, and they are not paid fair wages. Their living conditions are horrible. Not just strawberry pickers, tomato pickers, orange pickers, all sorts of migrant workers. And in a way, I feel like they are being questioned themselves, you know, your name, your place of birth, all of these things are mechanical aspects of you, that's the only thing that matters, that they are not seen as real, well-rounded human beings, you know. So I kind of took that idea of the ripeness of the strawberry that's being grown by these people who are not allowed to ripen, you know. So I think it works very nicely there. In mechanical aptitude, the reason is different. It's because it's based on my uncle, who as a child would take his toys apart in order to see how they worked. And I felt like throughout his life, that was his driving force, taking things apart. And as he started to get older, he started to become less curious about the world around him. And the questions were for me, you know, what was going to happen when he would stop searching for those answers about his world and how it operated. So that was more for me.
So it's like they're both questioning different things about life with different perspectives. So like kind of seeing like strawberry picker than just seeing like the overall where you grow up and other people, how hardworking they are, and then this one's just kind of like more personal type of thing. Interesting.
Very, my uncle is at the center of every book that I've ever written. My granduncle actually, and I loved him very, very much. He died 2 years ago, but he's also very much part of multiverses and the story in that narrative. And what I admired about him was precisely that he had a questioning spirit, that he never took for granted an explanation handed to him, that he always looked for the answers to his questions himself. And I think that that was something very valuable that I learned from him, because ready-made answers are simple and easy, but they're not always true. So mechanical aptitude, I meant that both mechanically and mentally as well. He had this aptitude for just getting at things that for a poet is really enviable, you know, because that's what I want to do with a poem. I want to get at something and pin it down. So yeah.
Thank you. Um, so in the poem Revelation, loved it. You talked about italics, and looking through it, I noticed that the only other word that was in italics was learn. And I was wondering what was the meaning behind it, and if that was like an emphasis to like you, in order to like shape shift, you need to learn.
That is a very angry little poem. I love reading it in public because everyone's always shocked and I curse in it. And I love that poem. You know, I've never written anything quite so raw as that poem. I was very angry when I wrote it and it just came out. And I'm glad it did, because I wanted to say that. Speaking to your question about the italics, it's what we were talking about before, you know, that since we're always writing from this marked perspective, anything that is outside of the white experience gets italicized. So I didn't want that to happen, you know. So the one word that is italicized for emphasis on what I feel that consuming white audience is trying to do. You know, it sounds very positive. We want to learn from you, but in a way, it's kind of cannibalistic. You know, it's like, here's my culture. What do you want to learn? And you know, a lot of the times it boils down to what to eat, what to wear, a place to go. Exploitative. You know, it's like a tourist culture in the form of a book. You know, I don't want anyone to learn anything about being Hispanic because I'm not one to teach. I'm just one Hispanic woman. I can't tell you about the entirety of Hispanic experience. I don't speak for my whole people. So no learning in that kind of deep sense. That makes sense?
Yeah. No, it's definitely like it goes back to the idea that we don't want everyone to have that go by stereotypes and the and just one idea of everyone. So yeah, I was just kind of wondering if just like the besides the Hispanic like part, it was just like in order to shape shift, you have to learn through experiences and like I don't know hard stuff. And I guess that's kind of what I got from all the book that the idea of like growing up with your family and going through love situations and struggles. So that's kind of why I was kind of interpreting like taking the idea of, but I get where you come from. I totally get
Yeah,
that.
growing up in Miami was a really weird experience because I didn't realize that I wasn't white until I was about 20. You know, you grow up surrounded by this enormous immigrant population, and being Hispanic is normalized. You know, the odd thing was if you saw an American, you know, it was almost like something to point out. Oh, look, there's one. Yes. But then I got to college, and all of a sudden, I realized, holy cow, I'm a minority. You know, and that was very shaking in terms of, well, what do I do now? You know, what am I supposed to write about? And initially, I looked towards others to tell me what I should be writing about. The first thing they tell you when you go to an MFA program is write about what you know. Um, well, what I know is growing up Hispanic, but not in any kind of particular way, just in a normal kind of way. So I never really knew what that meant. Write about what you know. Doesn't everyone? You know, I feel like that's a message that only other cultural writers get. You know, if you're Black or if you're Hispanic or if you're Asian, you're supposed to write about what you know. But if you're not, then you can write about everything you want. You know, so for me, I felt like I was shape shifting. I was trying to figure out who I was going to be in my writing. You know?
Thank you. Going back to what you said about how Revelation was something obviously really angry and like cursing, do you think that um, it's just overall like um, just trying to like find my words, um, not a good idea and like to go over there? Like, do you really think that it's like really risking it when writing those type of poems? Because I feel like overall people have this idea that poems need to be really proper and like I guess just yeah, the idea.
Yeah. Um, I curse in a lot of my poems. So it's not just this one. And for me, poetry, first and foremost, is about honesty. So if I'm feeling angry, I'm going to be angry. If I'm feeling sad, I'm going to be sad. If I'm feeling happy, I'm going to be happy. And I'm going to use the words that I would normally use to express myself. in those ways. I think what you're really asking is, am I not afraid to alienate my audience? You know, and really, we're talking poetry here. The audience is very small, so alienating a few of them is not really going to make or break it. You know what I mean? For example, when I read that poem at a conference in Jacksonville, and I got to the part where I said, "I fucking hate you," everybody gasped. There was like an audible gasp from the audience. But you know what? I felt like I had their attention for the first time. I thought that maybe they were sitting there kind of like, oh, you know, here's a poet reading something, blah, 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 blah. And then I cursed at them, and all of a sudden I had their attention. So in a way, I think that was a fantastic thing to do in that poem, you know, when it's appropriate. So, and then other times I've read it and no one's been shocked. They usually, when I read it in Miami, the response is very different. Maybe because I do have people in the audience who understand what I'm getting at. They're less shocked by it. So, but you know, read it or don't read it. You know, I'm not going to hedge my words in order to try to attract a reader.
Thank you. So, I guess one of my last questions is, since we talked about how shape shifting is most of that experience and changing as a person, what does multiverse has in difference or in common to it?
Wow, multiverses is very different. I already told you a little bit about the difference in the composition of it. I already had an idea for this book before I started writing it. So I feel that shape shifting in relation to multiverses is like a practice book, you know. It was me trying on different styles and different personalities, whereas in multiverses, I feel like I really found my voice, you know, and I found my strength as a narrative poet. Um, and I found uh, the book is about the death of my son. So it was very emotional to write about it. And not just his death, but a variety of other deaths that I experienced in that time period that the book covers. So I learned how to write about emotion with that same kind of starkness that I was using in shape shifting and poems like Revelation. You know, so a lot of my beta readers would say things to me like, "Oh, your book has made me cry," and at the same time they would say, "But you know, you really don't hold anything back." So I think that that's who I've wound up being as a poet. You know, I'm going to put it on the page, whatever it looks like to me, whether it's grim or depressing or insulting or beautiful or moving or whatever it is. I think that that is going to become my goal in writing, to write the truth as I see it. Um, and the poetry kind of comes second to that, you know. The poetry will take shape around that need to write the truth. So that's why I think maybe most of multiverses is very, very narrative. I mean, I don't, there's a non-sonnet in it. That's about as close as I get to form, but it's free verse throughout, and just a few stark images, nothing more, you know, very narrative poetry. So it's a departure. It's a departure from the kind of things that I was doing before. But there's also a big time difference in between the two. You know, we're talking 2006 to 2021. Um, in that time period, I spent a long time without writing at all. So there were things in there that were seething and changing. And this book is very, very different.
Thank you. So you think that definitely poetry helps with getting thing all out and like growing as a writer overall?
And the poets that I read tend to be confessional poets, for me, poetry is a way of putting your mind on paper. And a lot of people have told me, because the book, because Multiverses is about the death of my son, was it therapeutic to write it? Did it help me work out my feelings? And the answer to that is no, not at all. It helped me to write them down. It helped me to remember why I feel the way I feel, but it's not really therapeutic. What it is confessional. Confessional. There's a reason why that word is used for that kind of poetry, and it's not that popular anymore. It's associated with the 1960s and 70s, and it starts to sort of fall away in the 1980s. But there's still confessional writers. Louise Glick is still a confessional writer, and she's still very much writing. And I feel like that's the kind of poetry that I like.
I never actually really heard about confessional writers. It's interesting because now listening, maybe I consider myself one too. Do you consider yourself one as well, or what do you consider yourself overall as a writer? If you can explain it briefly.
If I had to categorize myself, yes, a confessional writer, an old school, this is my inner soul that I'm showing to you. What they had during the height of the confessional movement was poetry as therapy. For example, Anne Sexton, I think, was prompted by her therapist to write poetry. So for her, it was a means of working out her anxieties and problems. So if I had to put a label on myself, I would say, yeah, I'm a confessional poet. But I think also that because the audience for poetry has become so small, we're not really putting labels on poetry so much anymore. We're sort of, even if you look at your average journal, it goes all over the place. You can't say, oh, this journal publishes confessional poetry, and this journal publishes lyrical or narrative poetry or language poetry. They publish a little bit of everything, and I think that has to do with the diminishment of the audience for poetry, which is something that's very sad, but there's really nothing that one can do about it. It's not taught in the schools as much as it used to be. When you do teach it in the schools, you always read poems from people who have been dead for at least 200 years. So nobody knows that there are poets now, I feel sometimes, that there are living, breathing poets writing today. I think a lot of people think that we're like dinosaurs and we've disappeared off the face of the earth. But we're here, and listen, when people get it, they love it. Like when Amanda Gorman was reciting her inaugural poem, people were floored by it. All of a sudden, you had hundreds of people coming face to face with what a poem can be and what it can do for you, and that was a wonderful moment. I wish there were more moments like that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel like same. Like it's my parents still kind of like when I told them I wanted to go to school and like study writing, they were kind of like, okay, yeah, they were like, yeah, sure, you do that and type of thing. But it's definitely what I love. It makes me happy. It definitely helps me get rid of a lot of things, and I am proud to like talk about it to people who don't understand and make them kind of like get it. So I was kind of wondering if you kind of are you proud of calling yourself a poet and a writer overall?
Oh, I think it was a foolish choice. I could be a biologist or something. This, this, I don't know how it's like around the world. I get the feeling that there are other cultures that appreciate poets more, but this culture certainly does not. People want things for free, like even music. People aren't willing to pay for it, or books, or the only thing that people seem willing to pay for are movies. That seems to be the only kind of entertainment that people want to support, movies and to some degree television. So I think it's a foolish choice, but it also depends on what you define as happiness. Do you define happiness as being able to make a living out of what you love? Being able to make a living out of something that is very lucrative but you don't love? Or not making a living out of what you love at all and having to do something else in order to have, like a little corner of yourself be a poet, which is usually the way it goes. I've taught at the college level, at the high school level. Now I'm the editor of a journal, which is the closest I've ever come to working within the field. But if I introduce myself to someone, I'm going to introduce myself to someone as the editor of Perspectives. I'm not going to say, "Hi, I'm Celia Alvarez, a poet," because that's just too weird. It's just, you don't do that. It's like saying, "Hi, I'm Celia Alvarez, I'm a clown." It doesn't connect. People don't understand. Would I do it all over again? Ooh, I don't know. Probably. I mean, I try to sort of maybe do something more lucrative than teaching, um, in terms of what I do for a living. But would I choose to write poetry again? Yeah. You kinda have- it's when you that's something you want to do, you kind of have to do it. Oops, have we frozen?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
here.
there you go. You froze there for a minute.
I I heard you. Thank you for your response. I just assume sometimes, But yeah, no, I see where definitely my parents. I mean, I grew up in Panama, so they're like, yeah, you could just being a doctor or something, but it's just really what makes me happy. And I mean, I'm happy to open up as a writer for more things, but I definitely get where you're coming from, and they're like, probably people are gonna be like, yeah, poet, okay, not take me seriously, but I mean, I feel like poetry in general is something that it's not serious, like you just kind of mess around with it and do what you want with it. So
Some poets introduce themselves as poets. I can certainly see like Billy Collins saying, "Hi, I'm Billy Collins. I'm a poet." But the majority of poets don't self-identify as poets because there's always something else that they're doing. Usually teaching. I kind of think of it as ballets. More ballerinas than ballerinas. If you're going to go into ballet, I don't know what the number is, but only a very few actually make it into a dancing career with a company. And even then, they retire very early because by 40, you're considered too old to dance. So they have to go into teaching anyway, or choreography or something like that. But the majority of dancers are teachers, who just pass along this art form from one generation to the next. So with poetry, I think that we're kind of obliged to do the same thing. If you go into teaching in order to put bread on the table, teach poetry whenever you can, and teach live poets, and try to introduce people into the art form so that it continues to live. I think, it deserves to. It's very different from writing a novel or a movie. It's a completely different art form, and it's valuable. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time to let me interview you. It was a total honor to have you here. Do you have any last words?
Well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
What are your plans with your writing? What would you like to accomplish?
I I don't know. I mean, I really started with the idea that poetry was kind of the main things that I wanted to do and what really got me passionate about writing. And I guess right now I'm in that moment when I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do after college. The idea obviously is to go to graduate school, but I'm at this point that I'm trying to try other things. I don't think I am built to be a teacher or to do kind of like the research kind of aspect of the writing. I am more of a creative. I like to create new things, and I is it frozen? Can you hear me?
It's sort of choppy, but I can hear you.
Sorry. um I don't know, I'm just kind of like testing the waters, taking screenwriting classes, um, and something that also passions me is kind of music. So if I could be like a songwriter, so I'm just kind of wondering with that. Hello.
Well, you're very brave. I commend you on making an alternative choice. There we have lawyers. We don't need any more, but creative people do have a role in this society, and that role is to create awareness of the human condition. That is something that only an artist can do. A doctor can heal your body, a lawyer can, keep you out of jail, but only a poet or a writer or an artist can show you what it's like to be a human being. So I think it's very important that people like you and I, and others like us persevere, even in the face of rejection and even in the face of, not being paid for our work, that we persevere and we continue to do what we do in order to keep the art form alive and hope for a time when,
Thank you. It kind of like kind of the Wi-Fi was kind of messing, but I heard you said, and I definitely get that risking a lot of things and kind of like playing with this idea of being a writer is kind of hard, but I appreciate you.
persist, you shall make it.
Thank you. So I guess this is kind of the end of the interview. Thank you very much for being here, and bye.
Very much for